Behind the glittering curtain of British showbiz from the 1960s to the 1990s lay secrets that could shatter reputations. We idolized these women as perfect mothers, but behind closed doors, they sought comfort in forbidden places. Today, we uncover 10 legendary stars who crossed the ultimate line, embarking on highly secretive, passionate romances with the young friends of their own sons. Which of these hidden histories shocks you the most? Drop a comment below, and do not forget to hit that subscribe button for more untold mysteries of the stars. Diana Dors. The glamour of the British film industry in the 1950s and 60s often masked the chaotic realities of its brightest stars. She was the nation's premier blonde bombshell, a symbol of cinematic allure who commanded the silver screen with effortless magnetism. Yet away from the flashing cameras and adoring premieres, her sprawling estate became a sanctuary for a very different kind of life. The grand halls echoed with the laughter of a younger generation. As the years rolled into the 1970s, the traditional boundaries of family life began to blur in her lavish home. Her sons were growing into young men, bringing a vibrant circle of youthful companions into the household. These were individuals captivated by the fading but still potent aura of a legendary figure. For a woman who had always thrived on intense adoration and the gaze of admirers, the transition from maternal host to an object of deep fascination was remarkably seamless. Whispers soon began to circulate among the elite circles of London society about the true nature of her late-night gatherings. The sprawling mansion, once a symbol of her hard-won success, transformed into a stage for highly secretive rendezvous. She found herself inexplicably drawn to one particular friend of her eldest child, a charismatic youth who offered a refreshing escape from the cynical world of aging producers. Their emotional connection was electric, dangerous, and entirely hidden. This deeply hidden romance blossomed in the shadowy corners of her glamorous existence. They shared stolen moments, away from the prying eyes of the domestic staff and, crucially, away from the naive trust of her own kin. She showered her youthful companion with quiet affection, providing expensive tokens disguised as casual generosity. For the young man, being chosen by such a mythical figure of British cinema was an intoxicating experience that completely clouded his rational judgment. Maintaining the illusion of a conventional household naturally took a tremendous emotional toll. She lived in constant dread that a misplaced word or a lingering glance would betray their clandestine arrangement. The devastating potential of the truth coming to light weighed heavily on her spirit, threatening to shatter the fragile bond she shared with her boys. The sheer pressure of living this double life added a tragic depth to her final years, long before she passed away in 1984. Ultimately, the fiery intensity of this forbidden connection could not endure the harsh realities of their differing worlds. The young man eventually drifted away, seeking a future unburdened by the immense gravity of a seasoned star. She was left to navigate the twilight of her turbulent career with the haunting memory of a passion that crossed the ultimate societal boundary. Her legacy remains a complex tapestry of brilliant performances and desperately lonely choices made behind closed doors. Vivian Merchant. The British theatrical and cinematic landscape of the 1960s and 70s was utterly enchanted by her deeply mysterious aura. She was celebrated as the ultimate muse, a woman capable of conveying profound emotional depths with merely a fleeting glance. On the surface, her existence seemed like a perfect intellectual triumph, anchored by a high-profile marriage to one of the most revered playwrights of the era. However, the glittering facade of her public life concealed a rapidly deteriorating private world. As the 1970s progressed, the crushing weight of a failing marriage left her feeling increasingly isolated within her own magnificent London home. During this desperately lonely period, the atmosphere of the house was frequently altered by the arrival of her teenage son and his lively circle of friends. These young men brought a sudden, intoxicating burst of unfiltered energy into a space that had otherwise become suffocated by unspoken resentments and artistic melancholy. Among this vibrant group of youthful visitors was one individual who found himself utterly mesmerized by the melancholic beauty of the legendary actress. He possessed an intuitive understanding that reached far beyond his years, noticing the fragile vulnerability she tried so desperately to hide behind her sophisticated persona. What began as polite, hesitant conversations in the shadowy corners of the drawing room slowly evolved into a profoundly deep and entirely unspoken mutual fascination. Their highly secretive connection blossomed in the quiet moments when the rest of the household was otherwise engaged. For the acclaimed star, this forbidden affection offered a much-needed sanctuary from the bitter reality of her collapsing marriage and her escalating personal struggles. She found solace in the adoring eyes of a young man who demanded nothing of her legendary status, seeing only a woman desperate for genuine warmth. Their hidden romance was an oasis of dangerous comfort, yet the emotional burden of maintaining such a clandestine arrangement was incredibly heavy. She lived with the constant, terrifying anxiety that her own child might uncover the scandalous truth about his mother and his close companion. The necessity of projecting an image of traditional maternal grace while harboring a fiercely guarded passion required the most demanding acting performance of her entire life. It was a perilous tightrope walk that inevitably began to fray her delicate nerves. As the seasons changed, the harsh realities of their vastly different ages and social stations became impossible to ignore. The young man eventually had to pursue his own path, leaving her behind in a house that felt even more painfully hollow than before. Stripped of this fleeting source of happiness, she tragically surrendered to her inner demons, seeking comfort in destructive habits until her untimely passing in 1982. Her secret remained buried behind a veil of theatrical tragedy. Jill Ireland. She was a dazzling presence in both British and international cinema, captivating audiences with her striking beauty and undeniable talent. Leaving her homeland behind, she built a glamorous life across the ocean, becoming a beloved figure on the silver screen during the 1960s and 70s. Married to cinematic heavyweights, her existence appeared to be a perfect fairy tale of glittering premieres and luxurious estates. Yet behind the manicured lawns, a complex reality unfolded. As the 1980s approached, the dynamic within her sprawling family home began to shift dramatically. Her sons were navigating the turbulent waters of young adulthood, constantly filling the house with a vibrant, rebellious crowd of musicians and aspiring artists. The atmosphere was charged with youthful defiance and creative energy, a stark contrast to the highly controlled environment of the professional film sets she was accustomed to. She found herself deeply fascinated by this world. Among this chaotic ensemble of youthful ambition, one particular friend of her middle child captured her undivided attention. He possessed a raw, artistic soul and a brooding charm that stood out from the typical crowd of privileged youths. What started as seemingly innocent maternal advice regarding his struggling career gradually morphed into prolonged, deeply personal conversations in the garden. He saw beyond her polished celebrity persona, offering a profound understanding she deeply craved. Their highly secretive connection flourished entirely in plain sight, masked by the constant activity of the busy household. She would arrange quiet afternoons under the guise of artistic mentoring, ensuring the rest of her family was occupied elsewhere. For the young man, the intoxicating attention of such a legendary, sophisticated woman was an absolute revelation. He became a hidden sanctuary for her, a thrilling escape from the exhausting demands of her highly publicized domestic life. The psychological burden of concealing this intensely passionate bond was extraordinarily heavy. She was utterly terrified of the catastrophic damage that such a scandal would inflict upon her delicate relationship with her children. The constant need for deception, the careful orchestrating of their hidden encounters, required a level of emotional endurance that slowly eroded her peace of mind. She was living a perilous double life, torn between maternal duty and an undeniable burning desire. Ultimately, the immense pressure of their disparate realities forced the clandestine relationship to inevitably crumble. The young artist moved away to chase his own destiny, leaving her to face the harrowing challenges of her private life without his comforting presence. She bravely fought severe health issues until her immensely tragic passing in 1990, maintaining her graceful public image until the very end. The truth of her deeply hidden romance remained locked away forever. Joan Greenwood, with a deeply distinctive voice and an unmistakable aristocratic charm, she absolutely defined the golden era of British cinema. Throughout the 1950s, her captivating performances cemented her status as a revered national treasure. As she gracefully transitioned into the later stages of her career, her London residence became a tranquil haven away from the demanding glare of spotlights. However, the serene elegance of her private domain was destined to be disrupted by a sudden influx of youthful exuberance that would challenge her entirely. As the decades shifted towards the early 1980s, the dynamic within her sophisticated household underwent a rather dramatic transformation. Her beloved child was rapidly entering young adulthood, regularly inviting an eclectic mix of contemporary friends into their traditionally decorated home. These vibrant youths brought a refreshing wave of raw energy into a space previously defined by quiet reflection. She found herself unexpectedly invigorated by this constant stream of lively modern conversation echoing through her magnificent historical halls. Within this bustling crowd of frequent visitors, one particular young man found himself entirely captivated by her timeless allure and formidable intellect. He was profoundly different from the typical youths of his generation, possessing a mature soul that resonated beautifully with her artistic sensibilities. Their interactions began quite innocently, lingering over afternoon tea as they passionately discussed classic literature. Beneath the surface, a dangerous and utterly unspoken mutual attraction was steadily building, threatening her peaceful existence. This highly secretive connection eventually crossed the invisible boundary, blossoming into a profoundly deep romance shielded entirely from public view. For this celebrated actress, the intoxicating affection of a younger companion offered a thrilling emotional revival, a stark contrast to the lonely reality of a maturing star. She carefully orchestrated their quiet rendezvous during moments when the vast house was safely empty. The young man was utterly spellbound by the privilege of sharing deep intimacy with a legendary figure he had always admired. Yet the psychological burden of maintaining such a perilous deception required a constant, exhausting vigilance that slowly began to take its heavy toll. She lived in perpetual anxiety, terrified that an accidental discovery by her own family would utterly destroy her pristine reputation forever. The necessity of adopting a facade of polite maternal indifference while harboring a burning, hidden passion demanded the most challenging performance of her entire life. It was a beautifully tragic illusion, built upon a fragile foundation of profound secrets. As the seasons inevitably changed, the stark reality of their vastly different paths became an insurmountable obstacle for their hidden romance. The young man eventually had to depart, drawn towards a conventional future that she could never genuinely hope to share. She gracefully accepted the bitter end of their clandestine affair, retreating back into the dignified solitude of her historic home. When she passed away in 1987, she left behind a phenomenal legacy, taking the whispered truths of her most dangerous emotional adventure silently to her grave. Valerie Hobson, renowned for her immaculate elegance and aristocratic poise, she was a quintessential figure of classic British cinema. Her performances enchanted audiences, but her private life was defined by a notorious political scandal that rocked the establishment. Choosing absolute loyalty over a cinematic career, she retreated entirely from the glaring public eye. Her majestic home became a fortress of respectability, hiding a deeply complicated emotional existence away from the unforgiving press. As the turbulent 1970s gave way to a new decade, the strictly guarded atmosphere of her magnificent residence began to subtly shift. Her son was navigating young adulthood, bringing an array of vibrant, modern friends into their traditional domestic sphere. This influx of youthful energy presented a striking contrast to the heavy weight of historical expectations she carried. The lively voices echoing through the grand corridors awakened a long-dormant spirit deeply buried within her soul. Among these regular visitors was one extraordinarily perceptive young man who saw completely past her intimidating, polished exterior. While others treated her with a cautious reverence reserved for a legendary matriarch, he recognized the profound loneliness lingering beneath her perfect smile. Their early encounters were masked as polite inquiries about classical arts, blending seamlessly into the formal environment. Slowly, an undeniable, unspoken magnetic pull began to draw them closer in the shadows. This deeply secretive connection blossomed in the quiet, unobserved spaces of her sprawling estate. For a woman who had spent decades meticulously managing her public image and suppressing her desires, this deeply hidden romance was a breathtaking rebellion. She found an intoxicating solace in the genuine admiration of a younger companion who carried no judgment about her complex past. Their clandestine rendezvous became her most cherished, dangerous sanctuary from a highly structured, demanding existence. However, the immense psychological pressure of harboring such an incredibly dangerous secret was consistently overwhelming. Having already survived merciless public scrutiny, she lived in absolute terror of sparking another devastating family crisis. Maintaining the flawless facade of a dignified mother whilst indulging in a passionate, forbidden affair required an exhausting emotional toll. The terrifying prospect of her son discovering the bitter truth haunted her every step and clouded her peaceful days. Ultimately, the vast chasm between their respective stages in life proved too incredibly wide to successfully bridge. The young man eventually drifted towards a conventional future, leaving her to face the fading twilight of her remarkable life completely alone. She accepted this deeply tragic conclusion with the same stoic grace that had defined her entire public existence. Passing away in 1998, she carried the heavy, intoxicating secret of her final great passion quietly into eternity. Mary Ure. She possessed an ethereal brilliance that captivated the British stage and cinema throughout the 1950s and 60s. With her piercing gaze and deeply emotional performances, she became a defining face of the dramatic revolution of her time. However, behind the roaring applause and the glamorous film premieres, her personal life was a fiercely turbulent storm. Navigating incredibly intense marriages to monumental literary and acting figures left her spiritually and emotionally exhausted. As the 1970s dawned, the atmosphere within her bustling London home became a chaotic reflection of the changing times. Her children were growing rapidly, filling the grand rooms with an eclectic mix of teenage friends and aspiring young creatives. The house, usually dominated by the heavy artistic temperaments of her famous husbands, suddenly vibrated with a completely different, youthful frequency. She found herself inexplicably drawn to this refreshing wave of naive optimism. Amidst this constant swirl of youthful energy, one particular young acquaintance completely captured her divided attention. He was remarkably gentle, lacking the aggressive, demanding nature of the seasoned men she usually encountered in the brutal theatrical world. What began as fleeting moments of shared laughter slowly developed into deeply profound, quiet exchanges of intense vulnerability. He offered a comforting sanctuary from her incredibly demanding reality. Their highly secretive connection blossomed entirely in the shadows of her intensely scrutinized existence. She found a desperate, intoxicating solace in the presence of someone who adored her simply for who she was, stripping away the heavy burden of her celebrity status. They navigated their hidden bond with meticulous care, finding precious hours of quiet connection while the rest of her family remained completely unaware. It was a profound emotional escape. Yet the immense psychological weight of harboring such a closely guarded secret began to severely fracture her already fragile state of mind. She was utterly terrified that the truth would damage the delicate relationship she maintained with her beloved children. The constant, exhausting necessity of maintaining her everyday family life while harboring such intense, hidden emotions pushed her towards the absolute breaking point. The devastating pressure of this double life was overwhelming. Ultimately, the stark and undeniable reality of their completely different worlds forced this deeply hidden relationship into a painful conclusion. The young man eventually had to step back into his own promising future, leaving her stranded in a profoundly hollow domestic landscape. Completely shattered by the loss of this secret sanctuary, she tragically succumbed to her darkest inner battles, passing away suddenly in 1975. Her silent, hidden passion died alongside her. Rachel Roberts, a fiery Celtic spirit with an unmatched theatrical intensity, she completely dominated the British stage and screen throughout the 1960s. The fierce, raw emotion of her performances made her a revered national icon. Yet behind the roaring success and a famously tumultuous marriage to a Hollywood giant, her personal world was often enveloped in a profound, aching melancholy. When the spotlight finally faded, her grand residence felt unbearably empty and desperately deeply cold. As the turbulent 1970s unfolded, her domestic environment became a deeply complex sanctuary. Her home was frequently occupied by the younger generation, bringing an intoxicating wave of youthful rebellion into her otherwise silent, imposing halls. The presence of these vibrant youths, close friends of her family circle, offered a fleeting distraction from the crushing loneliness that haunted her later years. She was desperately searching for an anchor in a violently stormy sea. Amidst this lively and chaotic crowd, one particular young man stood out, entirely mesmerized by her fiercely magnetic yet devastatingly fragile aura. He did not see the intimidating, award-winning actress. He saw a profoundly wounded soul in desperate need of genuine warmth. What commenced as late-night conversations about poetry and the brutal realities of life slowly morphed into an incredibly intense, entirely unspoken mutual fascination that defied all traditional societal boundaries. This deeply secretive connection flourished in the absolute shadows of her highly observed existence. For this fiercely proud woman, the intoxicating affection of a much younger companion was a breathtaking escape from the bitter, lingering memories of her past romantic failures. They shared stolen moments of profound intimacy, carefully masking their deeply hidden romance from the suspicious eyes of her household. It was a perilous, thrilling oasis of comfort in a desert of personal sorrow. However, the immense psychological burden of concealing such a dangerous arrangement was incredibly, profoundly taxing. She lived in absolute terror of the devastating scandal that would inevitably erupt if her respectable maternal facade were to violently crumble. The constant, exhausting necessity of orchestrating their clandestine rendezvous pushed her fragile emotional state to the absolute limit. The terrifying prospect of public humiliation completely overshadowed the fleeting moments of joy. Ultimately, the devastating reality of their vastly different paths proved completely impossible to conquer. The young man eventually had to depart, seeking a conventional future unburdened by the immense gravity of a troubled, legendary star. Stripped of this secret, comforting presence, she was left entirely alone to face the overwhelming darkness of her inner battles. She tragically departed this world in 1980, taking the beautiful secret of her final passion entirely to her grave. Sarah Miles. She was the absolute embodiment of the wild bohemian spirit that swept through British cinema during the 1960s and 70s. Her fiercely independent nature and captivating performances made her a deeply fascinating figure on the silver screen. Retreating to her sprawling, mystical country estate, she cultivated a highly unconventional lifestyle far removed from the rigid expectations of traditional society. Yet, her beautiful domestic sanctuary hid a profoundly dangerous secret. As the flamboyant decades rolled forward, her rural haven became a vibrant gathering place for the younger generation. Her son was rapidly coming of age, bringing an eclectic and deeply energetic group of artistic friends into her famously eccentric household. The ancient walls of her magnificent manor constantly echoed with modern music and youthful laughter, creating a striking contrast to her seasoned worldly experiences. She found this influx of fresh, naive vitality absolutely intoxicating. Among this lively entourage was one wonderfully perceptive young man who felt entirely drawn to her magnetic, unapologetic aura. Unlike the fiercely competitive men she had encountered in the brutal entertainment industry, this youth possessed a beautifully calm and profoundly understanding spirit. What initially began as incredibly innocent strolls through her extensive gardens gradually blossomed into highly profound conversations about philosophy, unspoken desires, and the heavy burdens of fame. This deeply secretive connection inevitably evolved into a highly passionate and entirely hidden romance, concealed perfectly within the chaotic daily life of her country home. For this famously unpredictable star, the unwavering affection of a much younger companion offered a beautifully grounding anchor amidst her notoriously turbulent emotional existence. They orchestrated their quiet meetings with meticulous precision, carefully shielding their bond from the rest of her family. However, the immense psychological pressure of maintaining such a delicate deception required an extraordinarily exhausting level of constant vigilance. Despite her fiercely rebellious public persona, she was utterly terrified of inflicting irreversible emotional damage upon her cherished family unit. The sheer necessity of maintaining her everyday routines whilst secretly harboring such a profound emotional connection pushed her incredibly complex mind to its absolute agonizing limits. Ultimately, the vast, undeniable expanse between their completely different realities forced this highly guarded relationship into a quiet, immensely sorrowful conclusion. Her confidant eventually ventured out to forge his own conventional destiny, leaving her amidst the beautiful, haunting isolation of her rural retreat. She gracefully continued to navigate her deeply eccentric, solitary journey for decades, fiercely guarding the profoundly secret memory of her most dangerous emotional adventure. Susanna York. She was the absolute quintessential English rose with a fiercely rebellious streak, illuminating the silver screen throughout the 1960s. Famous for her piercing blue eyes and signature golden hair, she completely captivated global audiences. Yet behind the international accolades and her highly guarded private existence, a profound emotional restlessness deeply lingered. Her magnificent London residence, usually a fortress of quiet intellectual pursuit, began to harbour a secret. As the 1980s gracefully dawned, the dynamic atmosphere within her artistic household experienced a rather dramatic shift. Her beloved son was rapidly coming of age, frequently bringing a vibrant circle of contemporary creatives and wonderfully rebellious youths into their domestic sanctuary. The heavy intellectual silence of her historic home was suddenly broken by the infectious energy of a fearless generation. She found herself utterly revitalized by this constant youthful energy. Within this wonderfully eclectic group of frequent visitors, one deeply sensitive young man found himself completely enchanted by her timeless beauty and fierce intellect. He proudly stood apart from his boisterous peers, offering a mature, quiet understanding that immediately caught her highly discerning eye. What initially began as polite discussions regarding independent cinema slowly evolved into intense, lingering glances. A highly dangerous, entirely unspoken attraction was taking root. This deeply secretive connection eventually crossed the invisible societal threshold, blossoming into a profoundly passionate and entirely hidden romance. For this fiercely independent star, the unwavering adoration of a younger companion provided a thrilling emotional sanctuary away from the demanding pressures of her shifting theatrical career. They orchestrated their deeply intimate rendezvous during quiet afternoons, entirely evading the unsuspecting trust of her close family and true friends. However, the immense psychological burden of maintaining such a truly perilous deception required an extraordinarily exhausting level of emotional endurance. Despite her famously progressive public views, she lived in absolute terror of the devastating scandal that could permanently rupture her deeply cherished family bonds. The constant necessity of projecting an image of respectable maternal distance whilst quietly harboring an intensely burning passion pushed her to her absolute mental limits. Ultimately, the undeniable and incredibly vast expanse between their completely different stages of life forced this highly clandestine arrangement into a quiet, immensely sorrowful conclusion. The young companion eventually ventured forward to forge his own conventional destiny, leaving her amidst the beautiful, haunting isolation of her highly sophisticated world. She gracefully continued her theatrical journey, fiercely guarding this secret memory until she passed away in 2011. Nairi Dawn Porter, with an elegance that completely mesmerized television audiences throughout the 1960s and 70s, she was the absolute epitome of refined British grace. Her legendary performances in epic period dramas cemented her status as a revered national treasure. However, the flawless aristocratic persona she projected on screen masked a deeply passionate and highly complex private existence. Behind the beautifully manicured facade of her London home, a profoundly hidden story was quietly unfolding. As the 1980s brought sweeping cultural changes, the tranquil atmosphere of her sophisticated household experienced an unexpected and deeply vibrant shift. Her deeply cherished family was maturing, and the grand rooms were suddenly filled with the lively, rebellious energy of a new generation. Her child frequently welcomed a diverse circle of artistic and wonderfully energetic friends into their domestic sanctuary. She found this constant stream of youthful enthusiasm absolutely intoxicating. Amidst this swirling crowd of modern youth, one remarkably observant young man found himself completely captivated by her timeless beauty and quiet melancholy. He completely bypassed the intimidating aura of a celebrated television icon, offering instead a deeply genuine and profoundly comforting companionship. What initially began as incredibly innocent conversations regarding classical music and the arts gradually morphed into an incredibly intense, entirely unspoken mutual magnetic attraction. This deeply secretive connection eventually blossomed into a highly passionate and entirely hidden romance, concealed perfectly within the shadows of her highly observed existence. For this universally adored star, the unwavering affection of a younger companion offered a breathtaking emotional escape from the strict confines of her pristine public image. They meticulously orchestrated their quiet rendezvous, stealing deeply intimate moments whilst the rest of the household remained blissfully unaware. However, the immense psychological burden of maintaining such a truly perilous deception required an extraordinarily exhausting level of constant vigilance. She lived in absolute daily terror of the devastating scandal that would inevitably shatter her flawless reputation and permanently destroy her deeply cherished family bonds. The sheer necessity of feigning entirely polite maternal distance while secretly harboring an intensely burning passion pushed her to her absolute emotional limits. Ultimately, the vast and entirely undeniable expanse between their completely different realities forced this highly clandestine arrangement into a quiet, immensely sorrowful conclusion. the young companion eventually had to venture forward to forge his own conventional destiny, leaving her amidst the beautiful, haunting isolation of her highly sophisticated world. She gracefully continued her artistic journey, fiercely guarding this deeply hidden secret until she passed away in 2001.